service career, I served in Venezuela, Panama, and Chile. And all of those countries were so different. Sometimes I had to whack myself on the head to remember that they are in the same hemisphere. Indeed, it is complicated. In addition to being president of the World Affairs Council of Atlanta, Charles is also a senior lecturer at Robinson College of Business at Georgia State University. And he had a 34-year career in the State Department. And during that time, he held a variety of positions. And these included ambassador to Venezuela, acting assistant secretary of state for the Western Hemisphere, and coordinator for Cuban Affairs. Other postings included time in Chile, in Trinidad and Tobago, El Salvador, and Denmark. He has written any number of op-eds, and they've appeared in major US newspapers, including the Los Angeles Times, San Diego Tribune, and most recently in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Want to say, just on a personal note, I had the great pleasure of working with Charles. He was the deputy chief of mission when I was in Chile as the press attaché. And it was a fascinating time to be there. And when I became a deputy chief of mission myself, a little bit further along the line in both Kazakhstan and Sudan, Charles was always a model for me. I would sit back during difficult situations and say, gee, I wonder what Charles would do to solve this one.
How did that work out for you?
It always worked out, Charles. You're a wonderful model. So anyway, without further ado, I am really pleased to have Charles give this presentation today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark, for the fine intro. I do wonder how that worked out for you. When I last spoke in person at the Santa Fe World Affairs Forum, Mark and his wife Jane were wonderful hosts, and I am delighted and pleased to be invited back. Over the past couple of weeks, you've heard from real experts, Eduardo Gamarra from Florida International University, and Eric Farnsworth from the Council of the Americas. And I got to tell you, I'm feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome because those guys are the real experts who work on Latin America and the Caribbean every single day. I don't anymore. I stole the title for my talk from my son, Jake. We talk every week. We started arguing about politics, and he always starts by on any particular issue. It is, well, it's complicated. Well, as Mark said, Latin America is really, really complicated. And I want to thank the audience members for joining today and being interested enough in Latin America. It goes without saying that the United States does not pay sufficient attention to Latin America and the Caribbean. I am convinced that when I was in Washington with the State Department, that you could fill a medium-sized university classroom with all the people, Republican and Democrats, from Congress, from the executive branch, from think tanks, who are interested in Latin America and the Caribbean. It's a very small crowd. We don't understand Latin America, and we don't understand Latin Americans in the United States. We want to think everybody, all the countries are the same, all the people are the same. That's why, Steve, there was a map of Latin America, of the Americas, from Mexico to Tierra del Fuego, up on the screen when you logged in, and it's huge. It's huge. It's an 11-hour flight from Atlanta to Buenos Aires or Santiago, Chile. Atlanta, I was telling Steve before everybody came in that I used to work in San Diego at the University of California, San Diego. And Atlanta is actually closer to Mexico City than San Diego is. And the flight is shorter from Atlanta to Mexico City than it is from Tijuana to Mexico City. One of the reasons that we ignore Latin America is that it doesn't pose the threat of war. If you think of the three ongoing crises that might result in serious war, the Ukraine, Taiwan, and Iran, none of them is in the Western Hemisphere. Carlos Abreu, the Brazilian consul general in Atlanta, just pointed out to me that that's good. That's what you want it to be. And on the other side, the US is blessed. We've got a continental sized country with a huge internal market. We're a country people want to immigrate to, not from. We've got oceans to the east and west, and we have the best neighbors in the world to the north and south. As a result, we tend to stare too much at our own issues and disregard the rest of the world in the way that you couldn't if you were in Belgium or you're in Chile or you're in Nigeria. You just simply cannot do that. Latin America is a construct. Where does it start? Where does it end? Does it include the Caribbean? Does it include Brazil, where people speak Portuguese, not Spanish? What about the Suriname or the English-speaking countries? And is the United States part of Latin America? We're the fourth largest Spanish-speaking country in the Americas. Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, and then the United States. We've got 41 million Spanish speakers in the US. That's why I prefer to use the term Western Hemisphere. That's what State Department uses. And the Americas, this hemisphere, is where we live. So I'm going to start today cheating just a little bit, because I want to start with the two most important countries to the United States. And those are, of course, Canada. You didn't expect me to speak about Canada, and Mexico. Canada is our largest export market. Mexico is number two. Almost 18% of all US exports go to Canada. 16% go to Mexico. China, that we talk about so much, only 6.5% of our exports go to Canada. That's less than half of what we ship to either Canada or Mexico. 6.5% go to China. I think I said Canada, I meant China. Brazil is the only other Western Hemisphere country in the top 15 export markets. Canada is the top export market for 38 US states. I think Mexico is for the other 12 states. It's the largest export market for California. We import oil from Canada. Over half of our imported oil comes from Canada. In second place is Mexico. By the way, Russia is in third place with 7%. Saudi Arabia is in fourth place. The three countries of North America are essentially one integrated industrial economy, thanks to NAFTA and now the USMCA. And I think it's significant and factoid that two Canadian railroads are competing to buy the Kansas City Southern. So they have owned the railroad from Mexico across the United States and into Canada. So now, here's some, we'll set Canada aside. There's some promising trends. One is, as a result of COVID, everybody's talking about nearshoring, and that is shifting supply chains. And hopefully that will mean back to the Western Hemisphere. They're unlikely to come back to the United States, but they will go to Mexico and Central America and Colombia. And I think that'll be great. Also, there's a shift away from the Silicon Valley in terms of getting capital, starting and having a startup. I'm sure people in New Mexico, I know people in Georgia complain that when a company gets going here, it's got to go to, actually the company has to move to Silicon Valley to be successful. Well, that's no longer the case. And that's also true about startups in Brazil and Mexico and Colombia. The high-tech companies, I think now will be able to prosper without moving the company to California, and that's good for them. The most promising countries, I was talking to the Brazilian consul general, I realized I shouldn't just talk about what's going wrong, but also what's going right. So the most promising countries in Latin America are always Brazil and Mexico, Colombia, Chile. And now Guyana, where there's been huge oil discovery. ExxonMobil's made huge oil discoveries in Guyana. And that's going to be something that we, the United States, are going to have to keep an eye on, because Guyana just simply doesn't have the government institutions to handle a bonanza of oil. The countries that are disappointing in Latin America are Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and Peru. So Brazil and Mexico are both promising, and they are disappointing. Here's the basic problem in Latin America: low commodity prices, low foreign direct investment, and low economic growth. They go together. All that has been compounded by COVID. The CEPAL, the Economic Conference on Latin America and the Caribbean, reports that foreign direct investment to Latin America and the Caribbean has declined every year since 2012, with 2021 projected to be the lowest since 2005. Especially in those big South American countries, there's a key relationship between foreign direct investment inflows, the macroeconomic cycle, and the commodity price cycle. So now, these are the challenges for the Biden administration, although I will be willing to bet everybody on this call a cup of coffee at Starbucks that the word Latin America will not cross President Biden's lips tonight at the State of the Union address. So the challenges for the Biden administration are Chinese influence. China has become the #1 trading partner with almost every country in Latin America, except Mexico. The Chinese give great terms. They give loans with no conditionality, no conditions on the loans, that the loan won't be dispersed unless you do X, Y, and Z. And the Chinese are terrific in that they never criticize anyone. In case you missed it, we, the United States, love to criticize everybody, and we do it publicly. We issue a human rights report. We issue religious freedom report. We issue reports on everything that you can imagine. And when the Secretary of State or an Assistant Secretary of State goes to Congress to testify, and Congress asks, what do you think of country X, Y, and Z? We tell them. And as you can imagine, other countries hate that, absolutely hate it. Okay, so Chinese influence. Number 2 is the northern triangle of Central America. And that's the countries of El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala. That's the source for the people who are coming across the southwest border, not Mexico. Obviously, they transit Mexico, but they're coming from these 3 countries where the governments are essentially failures. The economies do poorly. There are armed gangs that are better armed than the local police are. The countries are unsafe. If you or I were raising our children there, we probably would leave as well. And the problems are intractable. We have been working on them for decades. And Vice President Harris has been put in charge of dealing with the flow of people crossing the border. And that's going to be a heck of a challenge for her. This is your mission impossible. Number 3, Venezuela. When I first spoke with Mark, that's what he wanted me to talk about. And I told him, I'm just bored talking about Venezuela. It is a disaster. It's a human disaster. It's not a disaster caused by a war or by a hurricane or an earthquake. It's disaster caused by ego and bad policy and stupidity and too much, if you can believe this, too much oil. Everything that could go wrong has gone wrong in Venezuela. Venezuela is a country of 31 million people, 5 million of whom no longer live in Venezuela, but live, I'm sure, in Santa Fe. They certainly are in Atlanta. They're all across South America and Panama. They're working in oil fields in the Persian Gulf and in Alaska. 5 million Venezuelans have fled their country. I'm losing track here. I think it's number 4 is Nicaragua. Nicaragua is a tin-horn dictatorship trending towards a monarchy. Again, with just about everything that could go wrong has gone wrong. And it's complicated by the fact that the opposition in Nicaragua is so split and among itself and constantly arguing. And they can't figure out that when Daniel Ortega ran for re-election, there were multiple opposition candidates who ran against him instead of just one. It's a question of not of political science, but of math. Haiti, number 5. Haiti is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. It's the most densely populated country in the Western Hemisphere. As soon as people get an education, they leave the country. It is just racked by every problem you can imagine, including earthquakes and hurricanes. And it has been that way as long as I can remember. And gosh, I mean, that's a country that the world needs to work on. And finally, I'm going to put Cuba in the list of problems, even though it's where U.S. domestic policy and U.S. foreign policy collide. Cuba is not a threat to the United States, but a large portion of the U.S. body politic and a huge portion of the Florida voters pay attention to Cuba, and it changes election outcomes in the U.S. And then I'm going to repeat Guyana. We need to keep an eye on Guyana. The government institutions just simply are not up to the challenge of an oil bonanza. And then complicating that is that Venezuela actually claims about half of Guyanese territory, including the oil fields, as being part of Venezuela. So Guyana, there are actually more Guyanese living in the US than in Guyana, mainly in Brooklyn. So this is a tough issue, and it don't look for oil to necessarily make things better in Guyana. It's going to complicate things. I'll be glad to talk about Cuba more in the questions and answers. Here's some issues that I think caught the Biden administration flat-footed. And I think the Biden administration got off to a great start. I mean, it's competency and expertise and lack of drama in the first 100 days, which have been admirable. But in this part of the world, there's 4 areas where I think they were caught flat-footed. Number one, they did not anticipate the surge of asylum seekers coming from Central America to the southern border of the United States, even though people on the ground knew it was coming. I mean, obviously, they seemed surprised and unprepared to deal with this, and they've changed their story multiple times about what they're going to do. It's difficult. It was difficult in the Trump administration. It was difficult in the Obama administration, and it will be difficult in whatever administration comes after the Biden administration. Number 2 is the KXL pipeline. That's a pipeline that was being built to ship oil from Canada to the United States. It had been disapproved in the Obama administration. Then the Trump administration approved it. And I want to say in the first or second week in office, the Biden administration canceled permission for the pipeline to cross the Canada-US border. whether it was the right or the wrong decision, the administration did not discuss it with Canada in advance. And by the way, from my point of view, that was the wrong decision. I'll be delighted to discuss that during the question and answer period. Number three is the Biden administration arguing that they want a foreign policy for the middle class, ruled out U.S. return to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is a trade agreement of 11 countries, including most of United States, Canada, but most importantly, Japan, which was aimed to set the terms of trade in the Pacific Basin, and which really was aimed to modify Chinese behavior, going back to China and Latin America. The reason I'm talking about it in our context today is that it's not just Canada that belongs to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, it's also Mexico and Colombia and Peru and Chile. The Pacific coast of Latin America belongs to the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Canada belongs, we do not. I think it was a huge mistake on our part just to rule it out. And then finally is COVID diplomacy. I think the administration really was not prepared to deal with the issues that came up by COVID, put the emphasis correctly on getting US citizens, US residents inoculated, but really did not pay attention to the rest of the hemisphere, let alone the rest of the world. They're now playing catch up, and they announced, I think it was yesterday, that we're going to start exporting, especially AstraZeneca vaccine to the rest of the world. But as you know, a number of countries in Latin America and the Caribbean have just been devastated by COVID. There have been in Brazil over 400,000 deaths in Brazil. I might have that wrong. Anyhow, a huge number of deaths. Then the health system is under severe stress, and the United States needs to help. United States needs to help. So now, none of this is going to be easy. There are limits to US power. Americans, our fellow citizens, tend to think of dealing with the world through military force first, and secondarily through diplomatic action. And that's almost our default position, is if a country doesn't do what we think they ought to do, how can our military, we have learned the limits of military action in Afghanistan and Iraq. And those were the lessons we should already have learned through multiple US military interventions in Haiti and in Cuba and in the Dominican Republic. We need to look at the whole range of relations with countries, not just hard power, which is important, the military side. There's diplomatic power. Now, Mark said, I spent 34 years in the Foreign Service. Mark probably spent more years than I did. So of course, I believe in diplomatic power. But what that means isn't just presidents talking to presidents and prime ministers. It means having an embassy, being present in the country, understanding the country, speaking the languages of the country, knowing not just the people in the government, but the opposition, civil society, larger society overall. It means assistance. It means USAID. It means the Peace Corps. It means United States participating in the Organization of American States. And it means the United States participating in the Summit of the Americas and using that to build momentum in this hemisphere towards democratic governance, good government, and economic policies that increase the standard of living, not just make the wealthy wealthier, but increase the standard of living in the country, and particularly bring people into the economies who have been excluded, who really operate in the informal economy, not in the formal economies of their countries. There's also soft power, and we do not talk about that enough. Soft power is the Academy Awards, it's music, it's gaming, it's McDonald's, it's US universities, it's online education, it's Fulbright scholarships, it's the Centers for Disease Control giving advice about diseases and about COVID. It is a huge influence in the world, and we need to figure out how to take advantage of it and use it rather than just letting it happen. Of course it's going to happen, but how do we use that to help us achieve our goals? Of course, there's economic power, and that's US investment. It is US companies, it's multinationals, it's Silicon Valley, it's direct foreign investment in the countries of the hemisphere, but it's Amazon and Twitter and Facebook. It's all the things that we do that makes the United States such a desirable country and makes people want to do business in the United States. It makes people want to learn English, right? So they can do business with the United States. There's also people-to-people diplomacy. And that's something that we really do not talk about enough. People-to-people diplomacy is people from churches getting off an airplane in Honduras to work with the local church that they're connected to. It's tourists, people going places, seeing places and meeting people and spending money. It's sports. I can't tell you when I was in Venezuela, how important US baseball is in Venezuela. And this was before the economy collapsed completely. I mean, how many people went to Florida for spring training to watch the games? How many people watched US baseball live on TV? It's soccer. And obviously it works both ways. I guarantee you, I'm an Atlanta United fan. We pay attention to the countries that our players come from. So let me go back to where I was talking a little bit earlier. And that is that diplomacy is like curling. Did you guys know what curling is? Remember that from the Olympics? What diplomats do, what Mark and Steve and a number of people on this called it. Thank you, Edward Chartar, 395,000 deaths from COVID in Brazil. It's like curling. We're the guys with the brooms, right? So when you throw the stone down the ice, you're there with the broom to get the stone to move a little bit to the right or a little bit to the left. That's what diplomacy is. People don't do things because we ask them to. People don't do things because we demand that they do it or horrible things are going to occur. People do things because it's in their interest, and we need to work with them and know them and convince them that it's in their interest, that their economies are going to grow faster, that their people will be better off, that they will benefit from doing the things that attract foreign investment, that they will do the things that protect the environment in their country, that they will do the things that will create jobs so that poor people don't hop on a bus and head to the United States from Central America. And that's what diplomacy is about. To finish the analogy, military forces is using bombs to blow up the lane, the facility where the curling takes place, right? You stop people from throwing the stone, but you kill the people and you blow up the facility, right? Diplomacy is getting the stone there, and that's what we need to do. And particularly in Latin America and the Caribbean, and countries that are developing countries, everybody in those countries always talks about, there are two Chiles, there are two Venezuelas, there's the well-educated, bilingual people in our country or at home in London and Tokyo and New York. And then there's the part of the country that is excluded from the national economy, that politicians tend to talk to only at election time, who really where the gap between the wealthy and the poor is enormous. And what we need to do it in this country as well. We need to work to incorporate those people into their societies, into their economies, and into their national political system, so they feel they have a stake in this system. And that's a challenge. It's a challenge in the United States. It's a challenge in Argentina. It's certainly a challenge in El Salvador and Guatemala and Nicaragua. I am going to stop there. I'm delighted to answer questions. I think I've spoke for half an hour, and that's what Steve asked